This bike does have limitations, being a 45-year-old motorcycle, but our job is to really get every last ounce of performance out of it while still maintaining the vintage aesthetic and not branching too far away from the technology that was available back in the 70s. The difference really is the acceleration capability with an 850cc motor and a bigger cam, and then the huge jetting. Of course, dual rotors up front. We've done that before, but we've got stainless spoked, aluminum anodized wheels, sun rims, work suspension in the rear, Race Tech gold valve emulators in the front. We're giving this bike every opportunity to have modern handling capability, even when we are translating it onto a 45-year-old motorcycle. Hey guys, it's Dustin Kott from Kott Motorcycles. It's June 2015, and we're gonna talk about this latest project a little bit. It's an 850cc motor with some very race-inspired technologies here, especially with suspension and braking and everything else. And so we're drifting away a little bit from just the restoration / customization, and we're moving in with this particular bike. We're moving into a really performance-inspired and motivated machine. So we were featured on a show, Naked Speed, in January, and the phone started ringing from different places all over the country, which was really cool. This particular guy had called from Miami and said, "Hey man, I've been following your work for a while. I really like what you're doing. My favorite colors are flat black and yellow. What can you do for me?" And I said, "Well, this." And it was very cool to have the creative and artistic freedom to be able to just kind of showcase those color schemes onto a machine with nothing more than just a handshake arrangement and a guy saying, "I trust what you're going to come up with, and let's have at it." So on this bike, just not unlike others, we've done our single tachometer bracket. This is a water jet cut aluminum bracket, and I thought that a tachometer was going to be critical on this bike just because of its performance aspects, the larger cam, 850cc bore, and we wanted to take in consideration all those types of things. Shortened headlight brackets, this is something we've been offering on the website, and these have sort of taken off, but what it does is it sucks this headlight in to that whole assembly, the triple clamp. It makes it all look uniform. It doesn't look like the headlight is on its own, way out here doing its own thing. It looks a lot more integral into the design. We're running the dual rotors, and this isn't necessarily the highest performance setup you can do. It doesn't equal twice the braking power, but what it does do really well is it adds a lot of aesthetic fullness into the front end. And so filling in this fullness here, especially with the black sun rims, anodized aluminum sun rims, the a little slightly oversized Avon Venom, it really gave the front end a menacing fullness, and that's kind of what I was going for on this bike. One nice feature is this manifold here. This is off of some kind of a early 80s Suzuki, but we retrofitted it onto the triple clamp, and it just really what it does is it makes this brake line setup a lot more sanitary, and it looks very intentional, and it allows us to not have to run a double banjo bolt and two separate lines out of the master cylinder. It just really cleans up the entire look. So I always like to joke around a little bit and tell everybody this is a really expensive sticker, but on the inside, this is an original, telescopic fork, original slider and tube, but we've got all the guts are replaced. It's got a gold valve emulator inside. It's got a new spring. It's got a new spacer. And what this does is it has a capability of controlling hydraulically. It gives a more modernized dampening capability to an old fork like this, where you're not just pogoing around on a spring. And so this was a critical component in the handling aspect. Presently, we're running the stock key hand carburetors, and I've got it jetted to the hilt right now. It's got 135s and 2 and 3 and 130s on the outside, and it's still actually a little lean. And I'm not sure if I'm going to go with CR carbs yet or not, but that's sort of to be determined. It still runs really great even at this setup, but I need to get it a little more fuel. So the motor here is punched out to an 850cc, and that's, I think, about as high as you can go without re-sleeving one of these motors. And it's got a fairly aggressive cam, enough cam to have affected our convenience of idling. One of the key ingredients for the handling on this bike was the custom work suspension. and I talked to Pierre over at Works just a few months ago and worked in conjunction with him, and they were actually able to nickel plate some of the body on the shock, and for what they're producing, you cannot get better handling on a vintage machine than with these types of shocks. So this was kind of a different setup. I wanted to have as much light back here as I could, and there was a couple of reasons as to why I mounted the tail light further back and on this design, but I wanted some assistance lights. At one time, maybe blinkers, but when I flipped this key, I was really happy with this setup. So there's a lot of visibility, and then these are just, like I said, they're marker lights is what they are, but it's just more assistance and more visibility, and then when you pull that lever, it really lights up. So we're on the far side of the bike now, and on these 750s, especially when I do these custom oil tanks, I always like to have as many indications of oil pressure as possible, and this gauge works really well. It's perfect coloring too. Got this flat black body, yellow faceplate, and a red needle. And then this kickstart lever, we nickel plated it, but also made a couple of appropriate bends so we can clear this rear set brake side. And this was a tricky brake to make, or rear sets in general, just because they had to extend outside of these pipes. Normally with a 4-into-1, you've got a collector that comes all the way underneath. With these, they stick outside of the frame rail, I mean, almost 1.25 inches. So I had to really manipulate these levers to make this all make sense. This is, people often ask what this is. Sometimes people think it's part of the electrical system. This is actually the oil lines. And then these may look from a distance like zip ties, but these are eyelets that are welded to the frame that these oil lines then pass through. And there's also a breather line that comes down and mates into the back of the crankcase here. But these are just the feed and return lines exiting from our custom oil tank on this particular bike. And the reason we approached it this way is aluminum dissipates heat really well, but we're also able to open up the triangulation on a 750 frame, which is, I've always liked that look. It's so skeletal, and so that really made a lot of sense. And then we come back here, it's fine, like I said, just trying to pepper in as many nickel finishes, but subtly as possible. And so we've got the chain tensioners and the bell crank, the arm for the rear brake. And I think that and also this hub stabilizer, this all came out really nice, and it just added an elegance to the bike and a timelessness and just a finished aspect, a finished look. This is a stock triple clamp that's been shaved down. These risers have been cut down and then re-smoothed, and then this is that bracket I was talking about. And it just houses this aftermarket tachometer that fits in there, and the cable passes through the back of the headlight. But it really fills in this area and gives a nice, clear center view of the tack. On this is a Super Sport tank, and I love using Super Sport tanks for a lot of different fitments, not just 750s, but all kinds of different bikes. But on this particular one, I left this little flip cap, only because we were tying in this number 2 concept. This was the number that the gentleman requested that we built this for. And so what's cool about this is I found these little gas blank keys, and it fits into that tumbler and it pops it open, and it's got a really convenient filler cap. On this bike, we decided to do another remote oil tank, actually, in the cowling here. And one of the key ingredients for doing this is that you want this, the best way I've considered doing it is to keep the oil tank static to the frame. That way we could soft mount it underneath. There's some rubber grommets that keep it off the frame rails, and there's no metal-to-metal contact. Now, in order to do that, you lose a lot of real estate for moving your electronics around. But on the Super Sport tank, we were able to make this a removable seat pan, and this thing pops out of place. And I was able to move this battery at a 45-degree angle just between the seat, which has a recess here, and then just fit it basically underneath the Super Sport fuel tank. Now, if we were to pop the tank off, you'd see that the starter solenoid, the regulator rectifier, and a terminal connector is all laid out on the frame. But this seems like it's always been the best solution. So one of the things that Kott Motorcycles is sort of recognized for is the framed seats that we make. And so what that means is using, quarter round bar and sculpting out a seat and then wrapping it in steel or aluminum. Well, with this particular seat, I got back into just doing sheet metal forming. And this is one piece here. This is just beat and shrunk and shaped, and it has this sort of dovetail look in the back, which really lent itself well to the placement of the brake light. But it just kind of, it gives that inspiration, that race inspiration. It's got a very 60s and 70s look to it. And then of course the filler cap is countersunk, and there's a little, you can see where the upholstery pan just recognizes that filler cap. But I tried to countersink that as much as I could, and it's the capacity of this is the same capacity as a late 70s Super Sport oil tank. So it's got plenty of oil in it, and this fits back into place really snugly. And it's just got this really clean, sort of even gap on both sides. I wanted it to look just seamless and as factory as possible, if you will.